Cafe Networking podcast promotes successful business experts. I'm Tom Rioch, known as the King of Networking, connecting people throughout the world from my podcast studio in Brazil. Joining us today from Richmond, Kentucky is Raymond Lauk, keynote speaker, trainer, author, storyteller, and an associate professor of educational leadership at Eastern Kentucky University. So Raymond, why do people need to be good storytellers?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. People need to be good storytellers because if you're speaking, if you're sitting in a job interview, you want your message to be remembered and you want to be memorable. If you just list your accomplishments or things you've learned or things you believe in, your values, what's important to you, and just list those in a bullet point fashion, if the listener even heard you the first time, I guarantee you they're not going to remember it after that, certainly not 5 minutes after that. But if you couch that in a story that is rich with details, that really paints a picture in the listener's mind, that makes you memorable. And it's also effective because you're communicating in a way that demonstrates. You can talk about your values, you can talk about your beliefs, you can talk about what's important to you, but a story shows it. It demonstrates what is so important. I've done a lot of work with the National School Boards Association here in the United States, working with school board members on how to share the magic of what's going on in their school districts. Because when I talk about storytelling, it might be your own personal story, right, and your own priorities, your own values and beliefs, but it can also be effective organizationally, right, for a business, for a school district. And so I teach school board members how to tell the magical stories of what's going on in their schools every single day. Because, public education has gotten some bad raps off forever.
Well, and that's everywhere. That's sort of everywhere.
But when you look at what's going on in our classrooms every day, it's pure magic. And so I teach school board members how to share those stories. Same thing with businesses. Right. Businesses stand for something. They have certain values. Well, stories prove it. Right. And it makes it memorable. For a short time, for 3 years, I worked for GE Security. It was a General Electric business involved in school security. That was the vertical that I was in. I was the marketing manager for the education sector. And I remember when we would go into meetings, the CEO of GE Security reminded us always of the business that we were in, because essentially we were selling stuff out of trunks. We were selling out of boxes. But you got to keep in mind, this was also in 2006, so shortly after 9/11 still. And he always reminded us through a story that our job is to help keep the world safe. And that's a whole lot more meaningful than selling.
Well, you've mentioned that's why I think GE is successful, because obviously, and we see this out here in the real world, unfortunately, many CEOs don't know how to tell the story.
No.
And we're talking about personal branding or networking, what have you. The leadership role is encompassing. It's not just being there. It's just not, following a rule book or a playbook. It's just show and tell, and it's to say. And it's not every day that you see a CEO that's out there doing that. So it's a school board, it's students, it's everybody needs to have the story and tell it.
Just as a couple examples, and I'm drawing from some school board examples, but they're applicable to business, to nonprofits, to everyone. But I remember the vice president of the Denver Public Schools Board of Education got up and told his story. He was a young individual, 26 years old, I believe. And he talked about the story of in high school, breaking into school buses. You want to guess why he was breaking into school buses, Tom?
No.
To sleep. He was homeless. He had been kicked out. He was home. And this is the story that he shared publicly, so I'm not revealing any confidences. He shared that, and with pride, and that he went from that position of having to sleep on school buses to now being the vice president of the Board of Education. That's a phenomenal story. And then in that story, he also wove in some lessons about his relationship with his mother and that, and professionally. Powerful stories. One more story that I'll share real quickly. We had a Gary, Indiana board member talk about being out campaigning, and he got shot while campaigning. Literally shot. And he told that story was in the context of how strongly he believes in public education and that it's worth literally risking his life. And so these are powerful stories. And the good thing is, the good news to everyone who's listening is you don't have to sleep on buses. You don't have to get shot to have a good story. Right. Everyone has great stories. It's your own life experiences. Right. And the thing that makes them great is, what did you learn from it? What was the lesson that you got out of it? And then telling it in a way that is packed with descriptions, with just the five senses.
Yeah, why would anybody want to listen to your story? It has to be. Right. You have to attract people to that.
That's right. There's always some tension, some conflict, generally that people have overcome, and they aren't always pretty stories. They can be fairly dramatic stories, but they don't have to be. The key is that it's your true personal story, packed with details, showing a lesson.
And it's not only one story. We can have a whole bookload of stories to tell, and use them on a need basis.
Yes, and the other good news is you don't need a million stories. If you have a handful of well-crafted, well-developed stories, they can take lessons going different ways. Kind of my signature story that I use as an example is about when I was student teaching in Boulder, Colorado, and my supervising teacher, who was probably 70 years old and still teaching sixth grade, would give me these critiques on Saturday morning at 6 o'clock. And the backstory is he had already been drinking when he would start to tell me, when he would call me up. But the feedback was the most incredible. And I would put details like the fact that he would go ask me to go pick up a case of Schlitz Tall Boys because he was out of beer after a few hours of giving this feedback. But people remember the details of that story. I use that story to demonstrate the lesson that I learned was that every interaction with a child is an opportunity to deepen and extend the relationship.
Right.
That's a story that can also be slightly tweaked, and it could be a story about mentoring. I was 20 years old. My supervising teacher was 70 years old. I was learning from his decades of experience. So you can modify your stories to suit a different purpose, just depending on which way you want it to go. So you don't need a million stories.
But what you've just said is that stories repeat themselves in a different way.
That's right.
Well, Raymond, I want to thank you for being here and sharing your time and expertise. How can our listeners find you?
They can find me several ways through my website, which is www.rlauk.com. That's rlauk.com, my first initial and last name. And otherwise, also my book is available on Amazon, Fuel for Learning, which fuel stands for focus, urgency, energy, and learning from what works. And that could be a story for another day.
Very good. Well, thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it.
And again, it's Raymond Lauk. It's Raymond, the last name Lauk. Find him on his site, rlauk.com. Find him on LinkedIn, and his book, Fuel for Learning, on Amazon. Cafe Networking is brought to us by Focus Semi-Market Intelligence, an agricultural market research specialist in Brazil. More information at focusmi.com. Talk to Tom, talk to the world. Thanks for listening. Until the next time here at Cafe and Networking Podcast.